Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling SOC engagements. Specifically, we're looking at what service organizations and their auditors actually need to do and how planning and risk assessment fit in.
That's right. We're using an informational guide, basically, to unpack these responsibilities. The goal is to make this whole process, which can seem pretty dense, a bit clearer for everyone involved.
Exactly, demystifying it. So if you're relying on or involved with SOC reports, this should give you some really actionable insights.
Absolutely, because understanding who owns what and how they approach risk is fundamental to trusting these reports.
Okay, let's dive in. SOC 1 first.
Yeah.
What are management's fundamental responsibilities? Where do they start?
Right. So for SOC1, management's first job is defining the scope. That means figuring out exactly which services, functions, systems, anything relevant to their clients' financial controls.
And they need to think about contracts here too, right? Like
Yeah.
what type of report is needed?
Precisely. Contractual obligations often dictate whether it's a Type 1, just point-in-time design, or a Type 2, which covers operating effectiveness over a period. They also decide how to handle subservice organizations' carve-out or inclusive method.
Okay, so scope, report type, subservice orgs. What else?
Then comes the system description. Management has to prepare a description of their system that's complete, accurate, and they need a reasonable basis for the assumptions they make about it.
Assertions.
Yeah, their written statement about the system and controls, they have to select appropriate criteria, state them clearly, and define the control objectives, including any required by, say, regulations.
And then link controls for those objectives.
Exactly. Identify the risks to those objectives, and then design, implement, and document the controls meant to mitigate those risks.
Yeah.
And finally, provide that written assertion.
Sounds like a heavy lift.
It is. Plus, they have to give the auditor full access people, information, everything, and provide written representations at the end, confirm internal audit help, if any, and crucially disclose problems.
What kind of problems?
Things like noncompliance with laws, any suspected fraud, potential misstatements, control deficiencies, times controls didn't operate, or important events happening after the reporting period. Transparency is key.
Okay. How does SOC 2 differ? Similar base, but different focus.
Pretty much. Scope definition is still vital services, the system itself, report type. But here you also consider risks related to business partners. And the focus shifts from financial reporting controls to the trust services categories.
Like security, availability, confidentiality. Those.
Exactly. Management selects the relevant categories. They need to specify their main service commitments to users and the system requirements needed to meet them. They also identify risks to those commitments and requirements.
And design controls accordingly.
Yes, and for Type 2, operate, monitor, and document them. They prepare the system description and assertion, similar to the SOC 1, but tailored to the trust services criteria. They also need to disclose significant system incidents.
And SOC 3? Is that just a summarized SOC 2?
Largely, yes. The underlying responsibilities for management scope, commitments, risks, assertion are very similar to SOC 2. The key difference: management doesn't provide that detailed system description in the SOC 3 report itself. The assertion outlines the system boundaries and key commitments, but the public-facing report is less detailed.
Okay, shifting gears to the auditor, what are their main objectives in all this?
The service auditor's core goals are, first, to get reasonable assurance that management's description of the system is fairly presented. Second, that the controls are suitably designed for their objectives.
And for Type 2?
For Type 2, also that the controls operated effectively throughout the period. And finally, to issue the appropriate report based on their findings, all following AICPA standards, of course.
So how does an auditor plan for something like this? What are the first steps?
Well, the planning starts with deciding whether to even accept or continue the engagement. Are they equipped? Are there independence issues? Then they must agree on the terms with management.
Terms like?
The engagement's objective, the scope, everyone's responsibilities, the criteria being used like CO, CISO, or the trust services criteria, adherence to professional standards, and acknowledging the inherent limitations of any audit.
And getting that management assertion agreed upon up front is critical.
Absolutely critical. The auditor needs that written assertion from management. Then they start the risk assessment process, understanding the system, figuring out where material misstatements might occur, and developing an overall strategy.
Let's talk materiality. It seems less about just dollar amounts here, right?
Definitely, especially compared to a financial audit. In SOC1, materiality in the description is more qualitative. Is it complete? Is it accurate in all significant respects? For operating effectiveness, it's both quantitative and qualitative. How many deviations, but also what kind of deviations?
Can you give an example?
Sure. Weaknesses in general IT controls, things like access management or change control, are almost always considered material. Why? Because so many application controls rely on them working properly. A failure there has wide ripples.
And for SOC2, how's materiality viewed there?
For SOC2, it relates to the likelihood and magnitude of risks impacting the achievement of those service commitments and system requirements judged against the trust services criteria. The auditor thinks about the information needs of a broad range of users.
What are common ways things can be misstated?
Common issues are misstatements or omissions in the system description, controls that aren't designed effectively, or controls that just didn't operate effectively during the period, deviations or exceptions.
You mentioned understanding the system for risk assessment, especially in SOC2. What does that involve?
It means getting a handle on all the components. The infrastructure, software, the people involved, the data being processed, and the procedures tying it all together. Defining the system boundaries clearly is crucial.
Boundaries meaning what's included in the audit.
Exactly. What's in scope versus out of scope. This can differ significantly depending on the engagement. Boundaries for controls over financial reporting might be different than for, say, confidentiality.
And linking that system to the commitments and requirements.
Right. The service commitments are the promises made, like system uptime guarantees or data encryption standards. The system requirements are how the organization plans to meet those commitments and comply with any rules. The auditor has to check if the description makes that link clear for users.
Okay. What about the risks the service organization itself needs to worry about?
They need to perform their own risk assessment, looking for things that could mess up their description or cause controls to fail. This could be intentional acts, errors, external threats, issues with their own subservice providers, personnel problems, maybe even relying on user controls that aren't in place.
Are there common factors that increase these risks?
Oh, yeah. Things like big changes in the operating environment, new people, new systems or tech growing really fast, new business models, restructuring, expanding overseas, new accounting rules. Lots of things can introduce new risks. These are often called inherent risk factors.
So the service auditor's risk assessment then builds on the organization's own understanding.
Precisely. The auditor independently identifies and assesses the risk of material misstatement in the description, the control design, and for type 2, the operating effectiveness. They don't just take management's word for it.
How do they actually do that assessment?
Through a mix of procedures, talking to management and staff, observing operations, inspecting documents like contracts and policies, sometimes reperforming controls themselves, reading other relevant reports. Walkthroughs are often really helpful to see how things actually work end to end.
And they're looking for fraud risk, too.
Yes, assessing fraud risk and the risk of non-compliance with laws and regulations is definitely part of it.
Wow. Okay. So pulling this all together, it's clear SOC engagements are really involved processes. It's not just ticking boxes.
Not at all. It requires this deep, shared understanding of responsibilities, really meticulous planning, and ongoing, thorough risk assessment from both the service organization and the auditor. It's that whole interconnected system that creates reliable assurance.
It really underscores the importance of that collaboration and clarity, which leads to a final thought. As our digital services get more and more tangled together, more complex and interconnected, how might our definition and assessment of these system boundaries need to evolve in future SOC work? Something to think about. Thanks for joining this deep dive.